Hi there, and welcome to a special edition of the Studyclix Podcast. We've teamed up with an expert teacher, Peter Tobin, to bring you a limited podcast series all about Othello, the play by William Shakespeare.
Peter has recorded a series of podcasts for us where he goes into the specific aspects of what you need to know about Othello when you're studying it for the Leaving Cert. He covers everything from characters and different themes in the play to understanding Shakespeare's writing techniques and tips on approaching exam questions.
This episode of the podcast series is about the themes present in Othello. Questions on the themes are common Leaving Cert questions, and it's important you know how to talk about them and how Shakespeare used them to effect in his storytelling. Starting with love, Peter's going to talk about 5 key themes in the play, followed by jealousy, role of women, prejudice, and appearance versus reality.
So, the next voice that you'll hear is Peter's. Enjoy listening.
The theme of love in Othello was important because, ultimately, it's what the whole play is based on. Many of the other things we see in the play, such as manipulation, jealousy, the violence, and even the death, all stem from that first feeling, love. And Shakespeare uses love as the engine that drives the plot forward. For example, the main driving force at the beginning of the play is that love between Othello and Desdemona. Despite the obstacles around them, Desdemona's father, Venetian society's prejudice, they marry and proclaim their love for one another. Brabantio's love for his daughter causes him to object to the match, believing that their marriage is unnatural. This tension creates a real sense of drama in those opening scenes. Shakespeare explores the theme of love in different ways too. There is, of course, the romantic love between Othello and Desdemona. This is portrayed as pure and even innocent at times. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. We also see evidence of familial love and the trouble that brings. Brabantio loves his daughter and, because of this, wants her to make what he believes are the right decisions. When she comes into conflict with him, it is because of love, and this leads to unhappiness from both of them as he casts her out and disowns her. And he even says to Othello, "I here do give thee that with all my heart, which but thou hast already, with all my heart I would keep from thee. So I'm giving you the thing that I wish I could keep away from you." And there's also platonic love between Othello and Cassio. They have had many experiences together, and Cassio even helped Othello to woo Desdemona. At the most strained point in their relationship, when Cassio gets drunk and wounds Montano, Othello still professes his love for him. He says, "Cassio, I love thee, but nevermore be officer of mine." One of the more interesting ways to examine the theme of love, however, is to look at Iago. Iago does not appear capable of love. His relationship with his wife Emilia is strained. She tries to please him by giving him the handkerchief, which may indicate that she loves him, but more likely she is doing it simply to appease him. "I nothing but to please his fantasy," she says. Perhaps Shakespeare is suggesting here that Iago's trouble, his anger and bitterness and darkness come from the fact that he is living in an absence of love. Even Rodrigo, who is merely desperate rather than bad or scheming, is seeking Desdemona's love. Iago is the only character who does not experience love in some level on the play. Despite the play being about Othello and Desdemona's love and how it's corrupted, perhaps the most perfect example of love is the platonic love between Emilia and Desdemona. Emilia serves Desdemona, but their relationship is not one of master and servant. Emilia offers her guidance and tells her about the ways of the world. She gives her opinions on marriage. She says, "I do think it is their husbands' fault if wives do fall. Let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so." And ultimately, she gives her life in defence of Desdemona's reputation. When Iago tells her to shut up, she says, "I am bound to speak." And when Othello tries to silence her, she says, "I care not for thy sword, I'll make thee known though I lost 20 lives. Of all the examples of love we see in the play, it is this one, between Emilia and Desdemona, which perhaps is the most pure.
That was the theme of love. Next you're going to hear all about the role of jealousy in the play.
Of all the emotions Shakespeare presents and explores in the play Othello, jealousy is the most destructive. But interestingly, it all depends on who is experiencing it. Iago confides in the audience in Act 1, Scene 3 that he's heard rumours that Othello has slept with his wife Emilia. He says, "It is thought abroad that twixt my sheets he has done my office." And in Act 2, Scene 1, he admits he also believes Cassio has slept with Emilia too. He says, "I fear Cassio with my nightcap." It's not immediately clear if Iago really believes these rumours or whether they are just excuses for his behaviour that follows. It seems ridiculous and highly unlikely for either Cassio or Othello to have an affair with Emilia, but regardless, Iago doesn't confront either of them about it. He is cowardly and prefers to scheme in the shadows. Jealousy in Iago, then, is a relatively weak emotion. He He is able to push it down and hide it when he needs to. For Othello, however, jealousy is all-consuming. At the beginning of the play, we see that Othello is not emotional. He reacts in a considered and thoughtful way when confronted by Brabantio. When he intervenes between Cassio and Montano, again he is calm and thoughtful, and yet when it comes to Desdemona, his jealousy consumes him entirely. He no longer thinks straight. Everything he hears and sees confirms his suspicions. So what is Shakespeare doing here? What's he trying to show us? He takes a previously rational and calm man and shows us how jealousy can utterly destroy his peace of mind. Of course, Iago is hard at work to misdirect Othello and sow the seeds of suspicion, but the way Othello unravels is quite remarkable. Upon closer inspection, we see that the jealousy Othello experiences is uncontrollable precisely because it's outside of his frame of reference. For example, when confronted by Brabantio and a group of armed men, Othello doesn't even reach for his sword. He is supremely confident. He tells the other men to put their swords up, for the Jew will rust them, and that if he needed to reach for his own sword and fight, I should have known it without a prompter. This is Othello's world, one of swords and men and potential violence. We learn in Act 1, Scene 3 that he has been on battlefields since he was 7 years old. No wonder he is so calm, relaxed, and in control in this environment. And similarly, it's unsurprising too that he's reached the position of general of the Venetian forces. When it comes to women in Venetian society, however, Othello is entirely out of his depth. He is a soldier, but also culturally an outsider, and Iago recognises this and he preys upon it. Othello's jealousy is then amplified by his naivety and his outsider status. Iago tells him that all Venetian women cheat, and that they do let heaven see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. Because he doesn't know any different, Othello believes every word Iago tells him. He is as inexperienced with Iago's deception and manipulation as much as he is with women and Venetian society. Othello's jealousy takes over in the final scene, and he is overcome by an epileptic fit. He is no longer able to control himself in front of others. He strikes Desdemona in public. And he believes that the only way to take control of things is to bring Desdemona into his world, a world of violence. That Othello thinks justice will be achieved by killing Desdemona makes sense when we consider violence and the battlefield as all he's ever known. He tries to make sense of a world he cannot understand in the only way he knows, death. Shakespeare presents jealousy then as something which is nothing of itself but terribly powerful in the wrong sort of person. Iago can control his, whether through cowardice or skill, but Othello cannot, and the consequences of that are terrible.
Another theme on Othello is the role of women, which is what you'll hear Peter talking about next.
In Othello, we see the representation of 3 different types of women. These 3 types roughly match how women were stereotyped in Elizabethan times, and certainly by religious figures at the time. It's helpful to see them in terms of Desdemona being at the top, Emilia being next, and Bianca at the bottom of that social ladder. So, at the top we have Desdemona. She represents the purest version. By the end of the play she dies, perhaps as a virgin if we are to assume that her marriage to Othello has not been consummated, and so she dies pure. She is beautiful, virtuous and chaste, the highest level a woman could aspire to in Elizabethan times. Next we have Emilia, so she is a wife, so she cannot be chaste, and Iago even raises questions about her fidelity. We see that she is outspoken and sometimes quite suggestive in her language. She goes against the rules by speaking out against both Othello and her husband. At the bottom of this social ladder we have Bianca. As a prostitute, Bianca has the lowest status of anyone in the play. While Cassio loses none of his reputation in sleeping with her, she has no reputation at all and is looked down upon by all of the characters, including Emilia. Shakespeare was well known for writing interesting and lively female characters. This has often raised questions about whether or not Shakespeare might have been a feminist. His female characters are strong, powerful and intelligent for the most part, but the question of whether he was a feminist is probably a little bit misleading. Instead, what Shakespeare does in this play and others is explore ideas around femininity and gender. What his own outlook was or wasn't isn't really as important as the ideas that are raised in the play. For example, Desdemona occupies the highest status of all the female characters. She comes from a wealthy family and marries a man who has a very high status in Venice. Despite this, she has the least freedom of anyone in the play. We see her being passed from one man to another, from Brabantio to Othello, following instructions constantly, and then finally being murdered in her own bed. We learn nothing about her own desires, her own self, other than the fact that she embodies the qualities she's supposed to. She's kind, loving, and obedient. Bianca, on the other hand, is at the bottom of the social ladder, and yet she has total freedom. She sleeps with who she wants. We see her able to move around Cyprus relatively freely. We get a sense of her passions and her personality when she confronts Cassio about the handkerchief and who he got it from. Emilia fits somewhere in between these two. She is married, and as such, she must follow certain rules, but she's also outspoken, wise and practical. Another idea that comes out in Shakespeare's exploration of the role of women is how vulnerable these women are, and they are certainly parallels between the Elizabethan era and the world that we live in today. As we can see, many of the male characters have quite serious flaws. Cassio can't control himself after drinking alcohol, Othello is so overcome with jealousy that he can't think straight, and Iago is utterly consumed with bitterness and rage that he takes it out on everyone and anyone. The female characters must simply put up with all of this from the male characters. They have no control whatsoever. By Act 5, Scene 2, we are in no doubt that Othello will strangle Desdemona, but neither is she in any doubt. She expects it too. Emilia has her suspicions, and yet none of them can do anything to stop this happening. They have no control in this male-dominated world.
Moving on from the role of women in Othello, next up is the theme of prejudice and racism.
The theme of prejudice is very important in Othello because it allows much of the action to happen, and it also allows Iago's plot to grow unchecked. It is also important because we actually see a few different examples of prejudice. In some cases, it's very blatant and obvious, while in others, it's a little bit more subtle. And finally, we also see the impact that prejudice has on those who it harms. So, right from the beginning, we see Rodrigo and Iago speaking using derogatory and offensive language about Othello. He's called thick lips, he's referred to as a beast, an old black ram and a devil. While Rodrigo and Iago are very open in their racism, Brabantio, Desdemona's father, is a little bit more subtle. While he does refer to the colour of Othello's skin, he uses the phrase sooty bosom, his prejudice is most evident in his horror that his daughter would marry Othello. Othello is the general of the Venetian forces. He is held in high regard by many of the noblemen of Venice, and he comes from royal stock, but he is black. And to Brabantio it makes their marriage unnatural. He assumes that Othello must have bewitched or poisoned Desdemona because otherwise she simply couldn't fall in love with a man like him, a black man. Probably, however, the more interesting aspect of how Shakespeare presents the idea of prejudice is how prejudice impacts on Othello himself. So Othello doesn't respond to the overt and obvious racism that he faces. He isn't outraged, for example, when Brabantio says that his daughter would never have run to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou in Act 1, Scene 2. And neither is he insulted when Emilia calls him a blacker devil and Desdemona's filthy bargain in Act 5, Scene 2. But Shakespeare's exploration of prejudice shows us that it is the subtle racism that Othello faces that really has an impact on him. The idea is repeated by a number of characters, including Brabantio, Iago and Emilia, that Desdemona has had her choice of all the noblemen in Venice for a husband, and yet she's chosen Othello. As the play develops and Othello's position as an outsider becomes clearer to Othello himself, with Iago's help, even Othello questions why she chose him, and to do so must mean that there's something wrong with her. When Iago is trying to convince him of Desdemona's infidelity, Othello says, "I do not think but Desdemona is honest." So he believes that she's honest. But the very next line, a note of doubt appears, and he says, "And yet how nature erring from itself." Here, Othello is echoing Brabantio's own assertion that their marriage is unnatural, that nature has erred from itself. Here, the prejudice Othello faces is being internalised to the point that he sees himself in the way that Brabantio and the others do, as different, as an outsider, as someone inferior. When he's alone, he even raises the question himself in Act 3, Scene 3. He says, "Haply, so maybe, for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation, she's gone. So perhaps she has left me and gone to Cassio because of the colour of my skin." Shakespeare's exploration of prejudice then is multi-layered, and we see the impact of both the obvious prejudice but also the deeper underlying prejudice that Othello faces both in his life but crucially on how he sees himself.
And finally, the last theme you're going to hear Peter discuss is appearance versus reality.
Appearance versus reality is a significant theme in almost all of Shakespeare's plays, and perhaps none more so than Othello. On a very simple level, this theme is evident in the fact that Iago plots and schemes in the shadows and feigns loyalty and friendship in public. The appearance of things here is very different to the reality. And Iago makes reference to this when speaking to Rodrigo in Act 1, Scene 1. He says that he must show out a flag and sign of love to Othello, but that he follows him only to serve my turn upon him, and that, in following him, I follow but myself. So Iago here is pretending to be Othello's friend, his loyal soldier, while all the time plotting against him. Yet he is also deceiving Rodrigo, making him believe that he will help him to woo Desdemona, while in reality he is only using him to finance his plot against Othello and Cassio. We see the direct contrast between appearance and reality, in particular in Iago's soliloquies. Lines such as, "I am not what I am," and "I hate the moor," are delivered plainly and honestly to the audience, but hidden from the other characters. There are other examples of appearance versus reality too, in how other characters behave. The Duke, in telling Brabantio that there's nothing that can be done about Othello and Desdemona's marriage, is much more interested in having Othello lead the Venetian defence against the Turkish forces in Cyprus than granting Brabantio's wishes, and similarly we see some deception in Cassio's quest to get reinstated by appealing to Desdemona but rushing off anytime Othello approaches. On a slightly deeper level, this theme is important too because sometimes the reality that one thinks they see isn't actually real either. Othello in Act 3, Scene 3 says that Desdemona couldn't be cheating on him and demands ocular proof of the eyes, from Iago to satisfy himself that his love is a whore, as he says. The ocular proof that is provided then is the handkerchief, and the charade of Cassio talking about Bianca while Othello is nearby. Iago also puts images of Cassio and Desdemona in bed together in Othello's head. When Othello demands proof, Iago says, "But how would you grossly gape on and see her topped?" Shakespeare's exploration of the theme of appearance versus reality emphasises both the deception and manipulation at the heart of the play, but also the deeper issue of proof. To a jealous person, what constitutes proof? Othello demands proof of Iago, but he ends up being convinced by something entirely circumstantial, like a handkerchief, and Iago's word. Perhaps Shakespeare is showing us here that we often only see what we want to see, or what supports what we already believe.
That concludes this episode for the Othello series on the Studyclix Podcast, all about the different themes in the play. Hopefully now you feel confident answering a Leaving Cert question on any of the themes Peter just discussed.
Keep listening to this series for more analysis on the play Othello. It'll help you gain a better understanding of the play and will equip you with the knowledge on how to approach a Leaving Cert question based on this play by William Shakespeare.
Thank you for listening so far, and as always, if you want to get in touch to leave any feedback, questions or comments you might have for us, you can contact us by email at info@studyclix.ie. You can also chat to us directly on the Studyclix website via the chat box in the bottom right hand corner.
Yes, and as always, don't forget to subscribe to the Studyclix podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay up to date with our latest episodes. If you want to support us, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or tell a friend about us so we can help as many students as possible.
And don't forget to follow Studyclix on social media if you're not already. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram and TikTok. We're always posting lots of fun stuff, lots of useful study tips and regular competitions, so it's well worth giving us a follow. And of course, a big thank you to Peter Tobin for working with us on this, for bringing his expert advice on the play Othello for Leaving Cert students. We hope you stay tuned for more.